expired. Senator Urquhart.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I rise to speak on this matter of public importance. This new government has been a disaster for working Australians. Since the election in September, 50,000 full-time jobs have been lost. Worse, there are thousands more people set to be unemployed through this government's policies and inaction, a government that is more concerned with attacking workers than growing jobs, a government that still thinks it's the opposition, whose agenda is to blame the previous government for everything, despite having been in charge of the country for months, a government whose purpose is to cut jobs, cut services and cut living standards for all Australians, all the while blaming workers and making it harder for people to retrain and find new opportunities. A government that went on election promising the world on jobs, promising 1 million new jobs, but whose policies and inaction have seen 50,000 jobs lost in the first 5 months of its term. A government that promised support for programs before the election, only to silently cut them while no one was looking. On this, you only have to look no further than the Wage Connect program, designed by the Labor government to get long-term unemployed people into work. The federal government provided companies $6,050 after employing an eligible job seeker for 6 months. This was a very successful program run by the former Labor government, with many thousands assisted into work. So what did the new government do? They cancelled the program. In early December, Assistant Minister for Employment Luke Hartsucker cut the program despite the obvious fiscal benefits of reduced assistance payments and increased income tax receipts. Miraculously, 2 weeks later, the Assistant Minister's boss, Senator Eric Abbott, ventured up to the northwest of Tasmania and brought forward his election policy, the Tasmanian Jobs Program. The Tasmanian Jobs Program provides only $3,250 to an employer and, of course, only to Tasmanian employers. Minister Abbott claimed that halving the wage subsidy would provide a much-needed boost to the Tasmanian job market. Minister Abbott is no doubt aware that his halving of the Wage Connect subsidy effectively imposes a 10% increase in the cost of employing a long-term unemployed job seeker on the minimum wage in Tasmania. Despite the rhetoric from those opposite about Australia now being open for business, short-term decisions like this only make it harder for businesses to put on more staff and get more Australians into work. There is no intention for this program to work. It's a trial program for 2 years that is halving assistance and only providing it to Tasmanian job seekers. This political trickery is exactly what Labor warned Australians about before the election. This new government, driven solely by an agenda to cut services to working Australians and to Australians doing it tough, slashed Wage Connect in half, rebadged it and had the gall to pat themselves on the back. The removal of Wage Connect will have negative impacts on employment across the country. Despite the rhetoric, this government is all about making it harder for those Australians who are doing it tough and blaming workers and their unions at every turn. I am a proud member of the AMW and was the State Secretary in Tasmania for a number of years before my election to this place. There are a number of members of the AMW Shipbuilding Division in Canberra today trying to build support for the Australian shipbuilding industry. The union has helped them put together a comprehensive plan for Australian naval shipbuilding and the employment consequences if the government fails to act now. I'd like to highlight here the work of Senator Carol Brown, Jane Austen, who was the Labor candidate for Denison, and Mike Kelly, the former Minister for Defence Material, the AMW and local industry in proposing a naval shipbuilding hub for Prince of Wales Bay near Hobart in Tasmania. The hub was to build on the tremendous work of Incat, Life Raft Systems Australia, CBG Systems and Taylor Brothers, and grow the shipbuilding industry in Tasmania. Central to this was a commitment from the then Labor government to procure the next round of Australia's naval fleet from Australian shipyards, including those in Prince of Wales Bay. So far, the new government has not committed to this plan. To the AMW shipbuilding delegates from across the country, I welcome you to Canberra and I wish you well in your campaign to secure high-skilled shipbuilding jobs for Australian workers. I implore government ministers to sit down with these workers, to listen to their ideas and work together to sustain this industry that is vital for both our national security but also for our economy. To do this, government ministers must need to end the blame game, to stop these ridiculous attacks on workers. Unfortunately, I don't hold out much hope of that. Today's claims on the front page of the Australian Financial Review, where the Treasurer, Mr Hockey, sought to blame workers for Toyota's decision to cease manufacturing, has quickly been exposed as complete fiction. Today's media statement issued this morning by Toyota reads, "Toyota denies the allegations in today's front-page Australian Financial Review story. Toyota has never blamed the union for its decision to close its manufacturing operations by the end of 2017, neither publicly or in private discussions with any stakeholders. It is a sign of the government's desperation, fabricating third-party statements to try and blame workers for their own policy failures. Rather than blame the workers and misrepresent meetings with senior management from major employers, the government should be focused on its election commitment to create 1 million jobs in its first term, an election commitment that is already set at negative 50,000 after a disastrous start to this government's term. A government whose leader fabricated the financial circumstances of SPC Ardmona in trying to justify his reasons for turning his back on workers and farmers in central Victoria. His own backbencher, Dr Sharman Stone, denounced the Prime Minister's attacks on the workers. The company released a statement where it refuted each of Mr Abbott's claims point by point. One of his claims that the workers were paid a wet places allowance and that this payment was over-generous showed his complete lack of understanding of Australian enterprise. This payment, for a few cents an hour, was paid when an employee provided their own uniform and their clothes were wet for a significant period. As the company has disclosed, a decision was made to provide the workers with appropriate clothing a number of years ago, and this wet places allowance has not been paid for some time. It's easy to blame the workers, though. Mr Abbott, Mr Hockey and Senator Abetz are getting good at it. But as this government is discovering, it's much harder to actually put in place policies that create jobs in Australia, or at least it's hard not to be completely hypocritical when doing so. In the lead-up to last year's election, both SPC Ardmona and Simplot approached the government and opposition for co-investment assistance for their operations in Shepparton, Bathurst and Devonport respectively. The then Labor government sat down with both companies and worked out packages that would see significant investments by both industry and government towards upgrading facilities. Of course, the opposition made no such commitment. However, the line in the sand had not yet been drawn. During the election campaign, the now Prime Minister visited Cadbury's chocolate factory in Hobart, a site with a significant AMW membership, to announce a $16 million co-investment promise, the purpose of which included, and I quote, an increase in chocolate production to 70,000 tonnes a year. Now, I of course welcomed this announcement and welcomed investment in the Claremont site and the government's support for its workforce. But this announcement came out of the blue. There was no immediate concern in Cadbury closing up. There was no immediate investment required to modernise the factory to save jobs. What we had was the then opposition leader rejoicing at the expected increased production at the factory, while the then Liberal candidate for Braddon, Mr Brett Whiteley, took to social media with a Cadbury chocolate bar to highlight the extra demand for milk and the resulting boon expected for Tasmanian dairy farmers. Clearly, this grant, this election commitment, was about increasing production at the chocolate factory, not tourism. After the decision to provide assistance to SPC Ardmona, the Prime Minister was asked why Cadbury's was not more deserving of government funding. His response was that the funding was to build tourism infrastructure at the site. It was different because it was a tourism grant. This from a Prime Minister that has abolished the Tourism Ministry and slashed the tourism infrastructure grants established by the previous government to assist small and medium tourism enterprises. This from a Prime Minister whose parliamentary secretary with a responsibility for tourism has been given the job of ending federal government involvement in the domestic tourism industry. Rather than blaming the workers, the government needs to outline exactly how it's going to meet its promise of creating 1 million new jobs.